Hello, everybody. Welcome to another of our virtual tours. Welcome to this tour to New York. And we've actually got two guests with us tonight. Welcome along, everybody, and thank you for joining us again. It's always good fun to hear where you're from. We may even have some New Yorkers in the building, you never know. So if you're watching, do drop us a little comment in the stream, and I will, as ever, keep my eye on that and try and make sure that I pick up any questions that are coming in as well. So again, we are back Tuesday. We're going to be here for an hour. So let me just introduce you to our guests. So first of all, Paul, good evening.
Hi, how are you doing? Hello, everybody.
Well, I'm very good. Thank you for joining us. And our other guest is Mr. Adrian Beasley. Adrian, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Sam, and everybody else. Hello.
Hello, indeed. Now, Adrian has got a very neat little background going on there. He's trumped us all with his New York skyline.
Well, I think we were talking about there's a storm passing over the UK at the moment, and it could look very like that where you are.
So very topical as well. Good stuff. Good. Well, if you've joined us on the other streams, you'll know the format. We go through some images from the locations. And actually, this is quite a nice, interesting one because we're going to talk a little bit about the locations, obviously, and Paul's approach, and also Adrian's approach, but a little bit about processing as well, and perhaps printing, because on this particular workshop to New York that Paul and Adrian lead, they do get into some processing out and about, sort of on in the field, so to speak. And so it's great to have both their opinions on that, which does vary a little, because obviously everyone has their own approach to it. So hopefully we'll unravel and reveal a little more of that. Right, let's get to the images. I'll try and keep my teeth in. And Paul, I'm going to throw to you primarily because this was originally your trip to New York, and you've done this tour a couple of times. We're going to be using a lot of your images, obviously. So just give us an outset, though, Paul, about why you picked New York and what's so stimulating about it photographically.
New York didn't pick me, or I didn't pick New York. Actually, Charlie picked me. It was the very first tour I did for Light and Land. And I remember Charlie phoning me and asking me if I'd like to do this tour for him when I wasn't working for Light and Land. And I was convinced he'd phoned the wrong Paul. But I love New York. I mean, I'd worked there a little bit on and off when I was working at the time. So I'd been there and back. So I knew the city a bit. And it's one of those cities that I instantly connect with. And, you know, you feel like you know the place because you've seen it in so many movies. You've read about it in books. You know, you're very familiar with it, and it's actually not a big city. Certainly, the heart of it isn't, and everybody gets a different experience. I just get so excited as soon as I land at the airport. I kind of switch into this sort of city mode, and I just love it. It's just fascinating.
I think for a lot of people that haven't been, it's definitely on the bucket list, and there's some of those stimulations we're going to get to and how you sort of deal with those photographically. So let's get into it a little bit if we can on the images, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. Thank you very much for coming, and let us know where you are in the comments. As ever, if you do have any questions, let us know. I'll try and pick those up as we go. But Paul, if you can tell us a little bit more about this particular image and maybe the situation around it and how you were at the time of shooting or what you were trying to capture here.
This is a really, really lovely view. It's taken from the New Jersey side of the Hudson River. And sort of the time of year that we go, in January, the sun sets right behind New Jersey and it lights up the front of the west side of Manhattan. Obviously, this picture looks amazing in color, but I only ever shoot it in black and white. What happens with the front of the buildings is some nights they go bright orange, sometimes they go gold. They have this kind of texture of like molten lava at some point, and you get these wonderful reflections dragging across the river. So I tend to, you know, show people the kind of thing I'd be looking at, and then I put my camera up and just leave it on long exposure, sort of going back to it and turning off occasionally while I dot around and see how other people are getting on. The only problem with this little bit of the Hudson River is it's absolutely freezing. Doesn't matter what time of the year you go, the wind is biting. Thankfully, there's a very good coffee shop just behind us, and a very big hotel. But it's a really, really lovely spot to spend an evening. It's a bit of a race to get back for dinner, but it's well worth it.
Just if I can pick something up about the actual image, and there's a slight coloration to it. There's a little bit of blue in there, isn't there? So is that something, because I know you tend to shoot using the modes within the camera in black and white, is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So I shoot a slightly different way to Adrian, because Adrian only shoots RAW in his black and white, so I shoot RAW and JPEG, which he always shakes his head at when I do it. But I like to shoot and then be able to download out the camera straight away, maybe to my phone or something, and I'm usually pinging pictures back to the Light and Land office. So this has been taken in black and white in the camera, and then the JPEG sent to the phone, and then I've just tweaked it in Snapseed before sending it across. So it's got a slight blue hint, which is a reflection of how chilly it was.
Yes, very nice. Nice touch. We won't go too deeply into the technicals, Adrian, in terms of RAW and JPEG here, because I think that we might get into that a little bit later. But toning is a nice thing to be thinking about with black and white, isn't it, Adrian?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a very natural black and white technology technique that we used to use in the darkroom and playing with our dishes of chemicals and so on. And the blue tint is, as Paul said, it's obviously a really nice sort of balance for this image, particularly given the nature of how cold it might have been. But yeah, toning is commonly used in black and white images, so it doesn't have to be just black and white.
Yeah, fab. And we'll get into that a little bit more perhaps. Thank you everyone for saying hello where you are. We've got lots of things, Cornwall to California, in fact, and everywhere in between, and lots of weather reports coming in, Adrian. You've started off a little weather situation there. So again, thank you very much. Give us a like and a share. And as I say, any comments as we go, any questions, I'll do my best to keep up with them. But let's get into another one of the images. And Paul, obviously there's a bit of a story behind this, and that obviously reflects into the type of imagery you might make in this location. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, this is at the World Trade Center Memorial, which, even so long afterwards, I always find it really moving to go. I mean, I was working at Reuters when the towers came down, and the amount of work that we put into covering the story. But Reuters, we lost a lot of people in the towers as well. So I always find it very, very moving when I go there. I actually find it very hard to photograph because it is a memorial. They're really happy about you taking pictures there as long as you're respectful. But I get kind of moved by the enormity of it. One thing I love about the place, though, is that on the person's birthday, they put a white rose in their name. So occasionally you'll see these white roses, and they make wonderful focal points for pictures. And I always like to just sort of isolate the rose with some names. And you have to be careful. There's a temptation to climb over it to get a better angle and all the rest of it. But the security guards are sort of on people who do that, because for me, it's not a photographic opportunity, but it does make very good photographs. So I think one of the things as photographers that we have to be is very respectful of, local memorials and local customs. And you can't move very far in New York without acknowledging the 9/11. It is a beautiful space to just spend time in there.
I think, yeah, following up on that point is, and you've had experience obviously with your press photography, but some people do find it really difficult in areas where they may feel it's inappropriate, maybe a strong word, but do you know what I'm saying? I think you just have to listen to how you feel at the time. Is that the best approach?
Yeah, I mean, I've been with people who haven't taken photographs, on a workshop, or they've taken pictures of the buildings around, but not of the memorial. And I think you have to be very much guided by your own sort of sense, really. And I've had people come over who've known people who were in the towers or in the area, and they still get very upset by it. So it's a place that you have to go to and tread lightly. So I'm always respectful of how people feel about it, and some people wander off and do their own thing. Other people, literally cover it from head to toe and enjoy the entire experience in a different way. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. Certainly, respect is the key. You have to respect the place and then respect how you feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adrian, we may get onto this point a little bit more technically later, but black and white being black and white is something you're keen on, obviously.
Yeah, and everything in between.
Yeah.
So images that are black and white can vary. How deep the blacks are, how white the whites are, and when we're editing it's one of the challenges is to work out precisely where those are, particularly if we're going to print the image later. Working out where the black point is, where the detail is in the image, and how it will translate onto the paper. So if we were just making images for social media or for kind of digital consumption, we can go a little further than if we're going to ultimately print them. So being sensitive to where the shadows are and where the detail is in the image and how bright the highlights are and how well those will translate onto paper is something that we might look at if we were printing the image. We might make a special version for print. We might make a print proof of a version that will translate better to paper.
Okay, fab. And we're going to pick up on that point as we go in with a couple of other images as well. Paul, this is sort of nightmare, terrors, Halloween-y, scary faces. Tell us, there's obviously some crazy weather going on here as well. So give us the background here.
Yeah, we'd been out shooting all day and we'd just come from the restaurant. And the hotel that we stay at is on the junction of 5th Avenue and 27th Street. And the wonderful thing about it is from the corner where the hotel is, you can see the Empire State Building. And we were walking back and this almighty rainstorm was happening and the wind was blowing and the clouds were coming. It was Halloween, which New York does big style. Every restaurant you go in, people are dressed up. There's a big parade, and the Empire State was done out in orange lights to represent a kind of pumpkin face. And I just thought that with all the cloud and the rain and everything, it just looked a little bit more scary. So we went back to the hotel, got our cameras, and in true professional style, we'd all eaten without cameras. Got the cameras and went and sheltered next to. So we're sheltering against the wall of a building because the rain's coming from our right, shooting up. So nobody got wet. This is what was amazing. We didn't get wet. There is a sort of scary face in there, isn't there? And actually sometimes, I don't know if you, and maybe Adrian, if you find this as well, sort of seeing other images within images, can be quite a nice idea to play with. And whether you see that at the time consciously or subconsciously, it's quite a nice principle, isn't it, sometimes to explore photographically.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, it's lovely. And in black and white, we have so much more we can do in terms of bringing parts of the image out or pushing parts of it back down. In the dark room, we'd spend hours just playing with pictures and playing around with how they're developing, dodging and burning and so on. In the digital darkroom, we've got so many more ways that we can, just subtly bring something forward a little bit more, make it a bit more noticeable, change the contrast a little in certain areas. So yeah, if you spot it, then it's really lovely because you can get in and start to sort of tweak and play with it.
It's got this very filmic look about that, Paul. I mean kind of, yeah.
Why ISO?
Well, no, I didn't mean that film. I meant sort of, 70s, 80s New York TV film. You know what I mean? There is an atmosphere to the whole place, and I think we're going to see that as we go through the images. And I think, without giving you too much of a kiss, Paul, it's a great representation of that style, and that's of the place even, and that's a really difficult thing to capture sometimes. But I'm going to just keep us grooving on a little bit. Thank you to everyone who's with us, and don't forget, any questions, do hit me up on the comments and I'll do my best to bring those in. And we've kind of been looking at things a little bit from afar, and obviously we've been inside a little bit, but there is obviously lots of stunning architecture and symmetry and patterns and things like that, Paul, within New York. So tell us a little bit about this particular zone and location.
This is right in the middle of Central Park. It's the the underpass underneath Bethesda Terrace, which has been in so many films. The place is beautiful. I mean, if it was in England, all the tiles on the roof would probably have gone, it'd be covered in graffiti, but because it's Central Park, it's treated with respect. There's usually a busker playing in there, and occasionally a couple of Chinese weddings happening. So you get full-on studio shoots. When we were there last year, we ended up being in a movie. There was some people were filming, and they wanted some people taking pictures, so they ended up filming the entire Light and Land group photographing this lady with her dog. And it's one of those places where stuff just happens, and it's quite exciting. I mean, the time I went there with Charlie, he ended up talking to Big Bird. I think you can see a video of that somewhere. He had this full-on conversation. I wasn't sure who'd taken the most drugs, Charlie or Big Bird. But it was a very strange day. But the underpass itself, I just love the symmetry of the arches with the regimented lines of the steps. But there's so much to do. Shooting the other way, you get the beautiful Bethesda fountain. And if that's on, it's just fabulous. But you get in the morning, we go normally early morning because you get the joggers and the dog walkers. And so you get sort of solitary figures, which tend to make, for me, nicer subjects. I am hoping, fingers crossed, touching wood, that when we go in January, there might be some snow. Last year, we missed it by a week. I'm hoping that this year, it'll happen. So, I mean, Central Park in the snow would be amazing.
Just a little safety point. People think about sometimes parts of America being a little bit scary, but New York itself seems very comfortable to walk around with your gear, and that's a safe place to be from that point of view, Paul. As well as obviously being in a big city, it's a big city, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
I mean, you have to be sensible. Don't leave your gear on a table and walk away from it, because it won't be there when you go back. But since Mayor Giuliani took over all those years ago, he set about cleaning up New York, and now it is really, really safe. There are so many police around, and they are so happy to help. The taxi drivers are, although grumpy, generally really, really helpful as well. We've had stuff lost on trips. I've not had anything stolen yet. One of the first clients I had, he left an X-Pro 1 in the back of a taxi cab. We did try and get it back, but he didn't take the cab's number. If you take the cab number, they trace the cab and you get it back. So there's a whole system in place for looking after you and making sure that you feel safe. I have never once felt threatened in New York.
Yeah,
never once.
And Adrian, just from a technical point of view, shooting in these dark, shadowy places can be problematic, especially if you have a large light source at one end, for example. So any thoughts about that from the point of view of recovery and or shooting at the time?
Yeah, I mean, if you're shooting raw, then you've got a huge dynamic range. And black and white as well is much more tolerant of noise. Digital noise these days is much finer grain than it used to be. In my first digital DSLR, I think, was a 6 megapixel camera, and that was quite big, the grain in that. But these days it's much more organic. Actually, it's become more natural, and a part of a black and white image, grain is kind of a natural part of it anyway. So the only thing you need to watch out for is your highlights. Make sure that you're not clipping the highlights, not overexposing, which is a temptation if you've got a lot of darkness around. So it's just to keep an eye on the histogram, just to make sure that you're inside. But the shadows, well, the shadows, we may lift and we may not. So they can stay dark. It's no big deal if they're a little bit noisy. What I really like about this picture actually is the geometry of it. I love the geometry, and I love the fact that Paul has got this absolutely bang on square. You look at every little bit of the archway on both sides, and they clip the wall at exactly the same points. That was a really, really lovely, and I really like that.
Yeah, and having it in a square actually complements that even more, doesn't it? Because it in itself is balanced, which helps everything else balance within it. So, and that can be a bit tricky, lining all those things up, especially in a city environment. You're not necessarily stood, hovering over your tripod, moving millimeter by millimeter. So I think, Paul, you just have a feel. I mean, you love that symmetry as well, don't you? You like finding order as well as disorder sometimes.
Yeah, I think, if you're going to do symmetry, you have to work hard at it and wait for your picture to arrive. Because it's only too easy to sort of just snap away, be slightly off, get home, and then you're disappointed. Whereas if, as you're in the location, you might as well take the extra few minutes and pay attention to the detail of the shot, the minutiae of it. Cartier-Bresson said that the difference between a good picture and a great picture is millimeters, and it is literally millimeters off either side, and you're lost. And it's not something. Symmetry is not something you can fix very easily in post-production. I don't believe, Adrian. Is that true?
No, absolutely right. I mean, you can do great things with perspective correction and a few things like that. But if you were two slabs to the left on this one and shot it slightly at an angle, there are things you can do, but it just doesn't look real. So it looks unnatural in the correction. There's plenty to do so if the camera here, you're shooting dead horizontal, so you've not got any converging verticals. But if you did have, you can generally pick those up and fix them. But the center of the image is much harder to correct for. You can't sort of reposition yourself into the center again. So yeah, no, this is great. The only thing that I find often is that the architects have planned it this way. They wanted you to see it like this. It's wonderful. So we're just kind of capturing their vision, which is interesting. But often you find like somebody's come and put the paving slabs in slightly off. Oh, that annoys me. Everything else is great. And then you find there'll be a manhole or something that's just off to one side. No, why did it do that?
Yeah, that does happen. And I get equally frustrated by that. Just a couple of things. A couple of you saying there's the odd bit of poor connection at your end. The stream is running really fine from here. So I know a couple of people mentioned that. We've still got, obviously, 99% of you still with us, but the video will be up on Facebook after and on YouTube. So if you are having connection issues, I suspect that's down to the weather.
It could be a lot of electrical noise going on at the moment.
Yeah, a terribly sort of British thing to say, but it's probably the weather, chaps. Quick couple of questions, and I will move us on to the next image, actually, just while we take the questions, because this is a lovely one to wander over. Paul, do you find you're still able to integrate a more mindful approach when photographing in such a busy and fast-moving place? Great question.
It is a really good question, and actually, it's somehow easier to be mindful in a busy place, because you actually, when you stop to photograph, you become aware of everything happening around you, and a mindful approach is all about awareness and observation. And as soon as you allow yourself to stop and just wait, you become really absorbed in what you're doing. And I find New York is one of those places that mindful photography really plays a major part for me, because you become connected. You let the city get under your skin a bit. You get a feel of it. You start to feel the nuances of the street. You start to understand the way the reflections are bouncing around off the buildings. So yeah, for me, working in New York, I find incredibly mindful. I'm very aware. I see lots and lots of details, lots of interesting things. Well, interesting to me. Generally, when I point them out to clients, they go, huh?
But that's it. People find interest in different ways, don't they? And I mean, I think probably this image is a great example of just being aware of light and of contrast. And obviously, I'm going to come to Adrian first, actually, and then Paul will come back to you, just so we can do a nice sort of 50-50 on this. But touching back on the point, Adrian, we made about dealing with heavy blacks, especially from maybe a printing situation. I look at this and I go, oh, this is going to be fun on my printer. So any sort of thoughts about this, using this particular image as a good example?
Yeah, this is a good example, because we've got some really dark shadow detail in the bottom left of the building, and you really want that to come across, but you also want to really hit that black point of the paper. So one of the issues with working with papers is to work out the point at which the paper runs out, if you like, so it can't get any darker. And if it can't get any darker, any shadows you've got in that little extra bit at the bottom won't come through. So they'll all end up at the same dark point. So there's a test that you can do for the paper that works out where that subtle point is. Once you've got a handle on that, then you can start printing the image. But one of the problems with an image with lots of black ink on it, apart from being more expensive than one that hasn't, is those black ink can drop off. So you have to handle the paper really carefully. You need to be careful with dust in particular. If you get any dust on the paper surface, when the ink lands on it from the inkjet, it can land on the dust itself, and the dust falls off as the paper comes out, and you'll find little tiny white specks. And in the old days, we used to have spotting pens. We go in with our little black spotting pen and put a dot in each of those white dots that have appeared. But I haven't really found anything that good for traditional inkjet papers. So maybe there are some spotting pens out there. Perhaps somebody can let me know. But it's an extra challenge for doing black and whites, particularly on certain types of paper. So you find it. I think there's some kind of metallic papers that have a kind of a static charge they can generate as they go through the printer that can pull the dust in. And then some of the matte papers are particularly prone as well. So yeah, so there's extra challenges. And then the white point, on the white point, it's setting where that white point is, both in terms of the histogram, but in terms of where the detail shows through. So it's a danger that you lose the detail in the highlights and you just get white there. So getting the adjustments in those areas to bring through the sort of subtlety of the light is really, really important too.
Yeah, great, fab advice. Paul, this is something that sort of shouldn't work, but absolutely does. So can you just set the scene? Because is this late in the day or early in the morning? There's obviously some nice side light going.
The side light is because this is the Chrysler Building, and it's just off the junction of 42nd Street. So the light is coming up. I'm trying to remember which one it is. It might be, I think it might be Park Avenue, or it's one of the ones a bit further over. It's literally coming straight up. So it's around about the middle of the day. So it's literally because the sun is right down on the bottom end, sort of shining straight up, and there's nothing in the way. So it's just hitting the Chrysler Building full on the front. This is pretty much straight out of camera, actually, which is quite amazing. I think I could probably do a bit more with the raw file, but it's shot with the red filter setting on the black and white. So the sky, which was clear blue, has gone very dark. I've underexposed it as well to just take the shadows down and concentrate on the highlight, because I just love that side lighting when I saw it. And I mean, it doesn't stay for very long. And what I was saying about awareness, this is why being very aware in a city and very tuned into it is important, because lighting like that stays for a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and then it's gone. You'll get reflections off the building, lighting another building, that because the sun is always moving, or well, we're moving around the sun rather. You know, it's there and it's gone. And if you're not aware, if you're not present when you're in a city, you miss so many opportunities. If you're just looking, you know, if we're going to Grand Central and you're thinking we're going to Grand Central, I'm just going to walk and look in the shops, you're going to miss so many opportunities on the way. You know, and it's that kind of place that you need to have a head that will go through 360 degrees every couple of seconds and up and down. And I mean, people arrive back at the hotel with neck ache because you don't ever want to stop looking.
Yeah, and I think that's one tiny thing I'm going to add. That's when you have to know your gear properly, because if it's there happening right now, you don't want to be fumbling, working out, oh, how do I flick the filter to green, red, you know, blah, blah. You need to know all that and be ready to go. And that's great advice about thinking about in black and white. I suppose when you've got those nice deep blues, which the traditional landscape photographer might not be too excited about in the middle of the day, actually black and white, that's a big plus sign. You can play with that a lot and make those really dark and dense, can't you? I just, okay, I'm going to pick up a couple of questions in a minute, but I just want to come to this image. The tour that the guys are talking about here, and obviously we're talking about the images primarily, but it is in January, so you do get that quite low light because it's winter light, I suppose, as well. So that must be quite interesting from a shooting point of view. But obviously this is at night, Paul, or first thing in the morning, but probably at night, I'm imagining. Tell us a little bit more here.
Are you suggesting that I might not be getting up first thing in the morning?
We may have worked together before, yeah.
No, this is early evening, and it's taken down by the Brooklyn Bridge. So you know, it's a very well-known location, but but we had a specific request from one of the clients to go and photograph the groins that looked back towards Manhattan. So we went down, and we were blessed with an amazing sunset, which obviously you have to imagine in black and white. But I quite like shooting sunsets in black and white. You know, they're a challenge. But you know, again, you don't have to go off the beaten track. This is right in the middle of the Brooklyn Park. Really, really safe place. People always stop and are inquisitive. It's lovely when people get involved. But you know, again, long exposure, using the groins as leading lines towards the city. You can see number 1 World Trade Center, the one with the needle on top. You know, but the city, when it lights up, it's beautiful to watch it light up. You know, it kind of powers up, and you sort of get a few lights over here and then a few over there, and then you know, it sort of kind of comes on in stages. It's wonderful to watch, and it's just choosing the moment. So this is before it's got properly dark. You know, you can still see the light in the sky, which I like, that sort of magical blue hour. We do quite a lot of shooting in the early evenings in New York because it's such a great city, day or night.
Yeah, and using the wind and to your benefit there with the streak, you know, the direction of the clouds, obviously, it's about being prescient and being aware of what's happening with the wind and knowing when you can maybe use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I think you know, you again, it's an awareness. You're looking at the way things are moving. You're studying the way the composition's looking, and then you can see the clouds are moving in what will be a more dynamic way than if they were going across. So using those, I quite like the fact there's almost two bits of cloud coming in from the top right hand corner that almost mirror the line of the groins. But I think I'd have waited forever for clouds to match it exactly. Clouds never do what you want, they always do what they want.
Yes, it's necessary evil, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to just, unless there's anything you wanted to add on this, Adrian, I'm just going to move us on for time reasons. Okay, cool. Because I really wanted to spend a minute or two on this, because it hits so many of the points about being a sort of multicultural city with, you know, this mix of old style New York, New York, classic New York, and all sorts of things. But Paul, can you unravel this a little for us? Because this is obviously, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I don't often photograph people. I don't particularly like people in my pictures. I find them quite annoying. But what I love in the evening and in certain situations is the way people bring things to life. And I like the little cameo of the people meeting next to the traffic light outside the store with the graffiti on the wall. You've got Mother Teresa, you've got an English Bible passage, you've got an Islamic passage, you've got the Empire State Building. And this is taken from the High Line, which used to be one of the rail lines that ran through New York to the meatpacking district. And what's lovely about that is you're elevated, but not too high. So you can do these little views day or night, you know, but I love it at night because the nighttime hides so much clutter and so much rubbish. You know, you just sort of exposed so that the highlights don't get burned out, and I just let the rest do whatever it wants. But there's sort of there's a story going on there. I always wonder what those two people down there are talking about and what they were going to buy from the shop or whether they'd come back from work. You know, I love the little stories that you can kind of tell through images.
Yeah, and there's lots of little pockets, aren't there, like you say, to discover those stories. And it's so quintessentially New York in a way. I just love the way you've arranged all those elements. It's like a kind of Rubik's Cube thing going on, a Tetris game going on there. Adrian, I know you shoot quite a lot in London, so every city has its own sort of vibe, doesn't it? And how, you know, any thoughts about how you go about capturing that?
Well, yeah, I guess it depends what turns you on in terms of the architectures and so on. For me, I'm a big fan of concrete. Not everybody's favorite topic, but a bit of brutalist, you know, architecture is great, but also, you know, the financial district with the glass and steel and the amazing lines and the modern architecture, the sweeping curves and all of this sort of thing, I absolutely love. And I think in black and white is just tremendous. So I tend to, I guess, gravitate between the sort of the concrete lumps and the modern lumps in London. London's pretty good for that. It's got quite a variety. Obviously, New York does too. So we've got, you know, you've got all sorts going on, and finding those sort of textures and finding the either the crunchy, grotty, paint peeling off of walls situation, which is lovely too, or modern glass, steam, and reflections. And the other thing that's interesting about cities, I think, is that the light is the way that light works in cities is so different to landscape. So with landscapes, we tend to like the low light to the raking light. So we get, because the landscape is horizontal, but the buildings are vertical. So actually, when the light is higher, you can get the textural features coming from the buildings, and the reflections work better. So very often it's quite productive to be working during the middle of the day, when maybe in landscapes we would be less excited by what's going on. So, and that combined with, as Paul mentioned about the blue skies and things like that, which again we wouldn't normally like as a landscaper, work brilliantly, particularly in black and white. So I think certainly the characters of the buildings are different from in different cities, but also generally working in a city is different from working landscape.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And I think, Paul, I'm going to pick up on one question, sorry, that's come in as I flick us through, just about how the tour is paced. And we've kind of talked about it a little bit here, but obviously it's an intense city. So how do you kind of break up the shooting other than lots of tea and coffee?
Yeah.
I think they basically answered their own question there.
Yeah, lots of tea and coffee, mainly coffee and some donuts. I mean, it is a sort of, it's a tour that's always going. We break for coffees, we break for lunches, but most people are quite impatient to keep going, and you have to sort of rein it back a little bit, try and get people to spend longer. So I have been sort of cutting back the itinerary over the last couple of years a little bit, so that people get a bit longer in places. And trying to arrive in places so you get the best of the light means that you're going to miss somewhere potentially. But towards the end of the tour, I sometimes say to people, is there somewhere you want to go back to? And if everybody wants to go back to a place, we'll head back. And people are at liberty to say, they all know where the hotel is. They are at liberty to say, actually, I would like to spend the rest of the afternoon here. You carry on without me. So I let people, sort of go their own way a little bit as well if they want to, on the understanding that they know they're going to miss out on whatever we're going to. And then I make sure that everybody tells them how great the location was that we went to, just so they feel really bad about missing it.
Classic tour leader stuff. Okay, so let's talk about this image a little, because for me it's sort of an inverse of some of the other images we've seen at night, where the darkness and the density is coming from the foreground and the sky, and we have the city lit up, whereas obviously we're inversing here, and we've got a great deal of clean and white and bright, sort of obviously greys, but you know what I'm saying, lots of clean space. And people talk about this sort of negative space. I don't necessarily want to get deep into that now, but do you feel using lots of space like this is a great way to bring a sense of calm, for example, into the image, Paul?
I do, but it also, for me, space allows the image to tell its story. And, for years, New York was a city that was arrived at by sea. So you would see the skyline as you came over the horizon or as you came into the bay. And I just when I was taking this, I was just sort of thinking, what would it be like to arrive at New York by sea? I mean, this wasn't taken from the Verrazano Narrows. This was taken from a bit further up the river. But I like to leave space so that I feel that I'm viewing the picture as if I was arriving. I could have just filled it with the skyscrapers, and then it's a picture of New York. But this is, for me, a picture about New York, and of and about are very, very different things. It's very easy to take a picture of a lamppost. It's very difficult to take a picture about a lamppost. You have to think a bit more. And I like to think before I commit the image. I like to sort of not intellectualize over it, but just sort of think about what's going on within me, and what the landscape or cityscape in this case is saying. So the space for me is important. I've done that lovely thing where you put the horizon smack bang in the center. I imagine there's a lot of camera club judges going, "Oh, I wouldn't have done it like that." But I really like the lines in the center. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I don't mind, equal splits. And I like the amount of space in the river, just leading into it with just the lines where the boats have gone. You only have to please one person when you're taking pictures, and that's yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's lovely little details with just the bridge here in the background. So there's some lovely sort of flow and recession. But Adrian, we've talked about, and more of the images have been on the darker end of things in the previous images. This is obviously a flip reverse of that. So again, we've talked about keeping highlights okay in the processing, but do you find this is something you can push even more of, when you're editing, or how would you approach this high key kind of look to a degree, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do like the high key look, and I think the high key look is fabulous. In this, it's contrast. The contrast is what draws your eye into the image. So if it were all white, it wouldn't work. If it's all black, it wouldn't work. But actually, the combination is just beautiful, and that simplicity too. I mean, I'm very much somebody who likes working on images, and I love developing images. I used to spend a lot of time in the darkroom. I love that. And I know we hear a lot about people saying, I just want to get out and take pictures. I don't really want to sit in front of the computer. But I actually really enjoy that. I enjoy sitting in front of the computer and playing with images, not in a clever way, not in a sophisticated, complicated way. Just I enjoy working with images. And very often images can go in lots of different directions. So, this is a good example where the original image, it might well have felt high or low key, but you can make it go in that direction. You can create the image by working with the tools in very simple ways, and I really love doing that. This image is you're quite right, is quite different from some of the others, but it has no less impact from that. I think the contrast is beautiful, and the simplicity is absolutely lovely.
Well done, Paul, you've passed. Good. Okay, just a quick question, Paul, a practical one about somebody who's actually booked on the trip for January already. Do you carry a tripod all day?
No, absolutely not.
There we go, Valerie. There's your answer.
No.
And so no, that might be specific to the odd shoot. Generally, you'd be walking around shooting handheld. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And good point about the about versus of. So thank you from David, who likes that point, and that is a deep one to get into. Perhaps not necessarily tonight, but it's very good to know about the thought process of the different photographers. And as we've had different people on here, from Joe to Charlie to Margaret, and obviously to you too, the great thing is everybody has their own approach, and you can learn lots of different things from different people, and it's a never-ending job, that, isn't it, of learning. But let's get back inside to some beautiful architecture, and this, Paul, you can explain where we are, but this is the kind of gorgeous architecture that we just don't see now. Maybe that's me being Mr. Old Man, but there's a majesty to the size and the grandeur and scale, I suppose. Is that fair, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, loads of people flock towards Grand Central Terminal, which is a beautiful rail terminal, but it is absolutely rammed with commuters and wedding photographers, YouTube, you name it, it goes on there. Whereas this is a Hoboken terminal, and it is 9 times out of 10 always like this, and it is just beautiful. It's one of my favorite interiors in New York because you can wander around, you can put a tripod up. The only place you can't go is up the stairs, and then they get really, really funny. But it feels like you've gone back in time. You sort of feel like you're in the 1920s when you go in there. I mean, I tend to see the world in black and white anyway, but I feel like I've gone back in time, and I am black and white. It's really quite a strange place. And then outside those doors that you can see, there's the railhead, and that loads and loads of rail lines just running out of the city. It was a wonderful find that I sort of stumbled on, by mistake while looking for a ferry. I've taken group after group back there, and everybody seems to really love it. So we spend more and more time, and it's so quiet. You do get homeless people sleeping on the benches, but somehow they kind of just add to the atmosphere. So it has this wonderful sort of air about it. I mean, it's an enormous place, and it is just beautiful.
It feels like a film set to me, and I think
Yeah.
these lights up here
Interesting,
just
isn't it?
remind me of that sort of theatre
Yeah.
vibe. And I can just imagine an old school black and white film with a beautifully dressed star and, you know,
Yeah.
man and wife, Clark Gable, whoever, crossing the floor.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about this is on the wall, they have a line, and I can't remember which storm it was that ripped the whole of the New York to pieces, but there's a line on the wall which is about the height of the shades you see above the seats, and that's where the floodwater reached, and it ripped the inside to pieces, and yet they've restored it, completely as it was.
Wow.
You know, there's no new stuff gone in there. It's all been recovered and retrieved and restored, and but done so beautifully. So good on New
Nice.
York.
And lots of beautiful symmetry again, which
Yeah, well,
we're going to come to a little bit more in the next couple of images, which we've talked about sort of classic vintage there to a degree, albeit potentially rebuilt in part. But with the next couple of images, actually pick up on a lot of the things we talked about in terms of brights and darks, whites and blacks. But this is a very different sort of architectural space, Paul. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, this is the Oculus Building, which actually comes out onto the World Trade Center Memorial, but it's effectively a massive shopping center, and it's run by the people who own Westfield. But weirdly, the Americans are okay about you taking pictures inside of it. It's designed by Calatrava, and you go in there and there is just the most incredible sense of light and space. And it's got sort of 3 levels. When you're looking down, it looks like you're looking down into a Lowry painting. The figures look so small, but I just get hooked by the roof and the fins. The building itself is supposed to resemble from the outside a dove taking off to symbolize peace. I think it looks a little bit more like a giant armadillo, but I wouldn't tell Calatrava that. But for me, I just love shooting this sort of high key stuff where you retain as much detail as you can in the highlights, because it just mirrors that sense of light and space that I get when I'm in there. It's normally one of the first places I go to because I'm always so excited. I really want to get back there. So, generally it's, a weekday when it's not too busy, but handy because it's straight rail line there, and we're there in 5 minutes.
It's interesting you mentioned about the outside, and just simply knowing about where you are shooting can and should and does affect how you feel in the space, and then how you react to it and how you represent that photographically, about it representing peace. You then sort of kill that a little with the armadillo comment, but we'll move on from that, because I did want to just point out, and then Adrian will bring you in on this, that obviously there can be multiple ways to approach different parts of different architectural spaces. And we talked a lot about sort of some of the older architecture that we saw in the train station there. And you and I talked just briefly about the Brutalist and the stuff within London, whereas this modern architecture has its own appeal, doesn't it? Its own repetition and graphic shape and design. Yeah,
totally. I mean, it's just completely amazing. It's unconventional. You don't know which way up it is. It could be anything. And the flowing lines, the curves, the contrast in the images, contrast all over the place. So actually one of the challenges with opportunities, when we're working with black and white images, is to decide how you kind of lead the viewer through the image and what you want to, if you like, bring forward and what you want to push back. But actually sometimes just having, contrast everywhere, your eye just darts all over the place when something more abstract like this, it is fantastic. And then balancing, one side, the dark side against the light side, it's and the alignment and all the rest. There's just so many possibilities. It's really lovely. The repetition, the geometry, the curves. I really like this kind of intimate detail. Although I don't even know the scale of that. So how big are we looking at, Paul?
I'm trying to think in London buses, but it's probably, that's looking up from the ground, up the outside of the Oculus. So it's probably 4, maybe 5 London buses high.
Right. And it could so easily have been, you know, that size.
Yeah,
You just have no sense of scale,
yeah.
which is lovely. So yes,
it's always nice to intrigue people when they look at you, when they look at pictures.
yeah,
You don't want
try
to
and
lay
work
it all
out.
out on a plate every time, do you?
No, no,
Yeah.
and the light side and the dark side. So there's almost like the right is in a complete inversion of the left, which is really lovely. Black lines on the right and white lines on the left.
Yeah.
Really, really lovely.
And that, yeah, absolutely. And you've got verticals and horizontals, and so that's a contrast in itself. So again, another pass, Paul. Well done, mate. You're getting good at this. I just wanted to say, and I'm going to keep us moving though, just for time, but I really love this, not being afraid to use really, and you can do it with light tones as well, but using dark spaces to just dissolve and disappear into.
Yeah.
That can be slightly menacing, but it can be used really effectively, which obviously you've done very well here. But I am going to just keep us going just for time reasons. Everyone, thank you very much for coming along with us tonight and staying with us as you have. We've got 10 minutes or so left. There's another 3 or 4 images, so stick with us to the end. There's some nice images to come. Trains and interiors is something we've sort of touched on, Paul, but sometimes signage can be a great little thing to play with.
Yeah, this is a sort of place that has only just opened up again. It had been closed for a long time after some of the storms did a lot of damage to it. And it's down by the Empty Skies Memorial in New Jersey. And it's just an old rail terminal. To the left, as I'm looking at it, is where the trains would be, as the arrow says. But they're all abandoned tracks, you know, so it's a fantastic photographic subject. And if you walk directly behind me, you can walk up towards the Statue of Liberty. But I was just fascinated by this end. I don't know what I was, you know, what particularly drew me to it at the time, but it just, there's just sort of a lovely kind of play with all the light behind it. I mean, I deliberately overexpose the background, so there is no detail in there at all, Adrian. I am very sorry.
I'm okay with that.
You know, but to me, it was just like that's kind of going into the unknown. And you know, again, these old places in New York that are open and you can go and have a look round and explore. They're fascinating subjects. You could literally spend a day just walking around this place. You know, they've even got the old waiting room open as a coffee shop, which is quite nice.
A good place to pause there. And texture, I just wanted to say quickly about texture, and maybe Adrian. Texture is a great thing to play with. Physical texture can translate beautifully into texture in an image, and we've got smooth areas here, obviously, of the building. Oh, they look smooth, and we've got this gnarled sort of riveted steel. So that can be a great thing for black and white, can't it?
Yeah, certainly. And in fact, one of the things that we'll be doing is I'll be carrying around a laptop with me. So we'll be able to, you know, if we're in a place like this, we'll be able to take some pictures, plug them straight into the laptop, and actually do some visualizing of the results and work on some editing. So we'll be able to, you know, pull these out. And once we do that, that might well give you some ideas about the shooting as well. So actually be able to sort of get a bit of instant feedback around what we might be able to get from the images whilst we're in a place. But yeah, the textural side of it and the way that you can play with the contrast in the image to bring the textures out. So I'm a big fan of clarity and dehaze in black and white images, because they have the ability to really get in and accentuate those details in a way that in color images just tends to ruin them. So but in black and white images, we've got way more leeway to work with contrast, particularly if we do that, you know, locally, or we may do it globally, but often locally is the way to pull out the details in certain aspects, particularly in the areas you want people to look at, to draw their attention.
Yeah, focus in on. Just quick point. Someone just made a point. I know we're a long way in now, but it's a good one if you're joining us next week. Is that you guys if you're viewing at home, you can actually change the settings of the video. If you hover down the bottom of the screen, there's a little cog, or to the left is a speaker icon, depending on how you're looking at it. You can hover on that and switch it from auto to HD, and that will probably give you a better stream. It might eat up a bit more of your internet connection, but it'll give you a better stream. So top tip for the next 6 minutes, and for next week's hour, and from every Tuesday after that. But thank you for Lynn, who's found that out. Well done, good tech detail. Paul, we wanted to have this one in because it's a totally different vibe, and there's been such a stamp of New York all over the images now. And okay, if you know New York, you would also potentially know that from this image, but just a great example of understanding geometry and scale and shape and flow. So what kind of pressed your buttons, so to speak, here?
It was just the zigzag of the path. This is on the High Line, and it's a really wonderful outdoor space. As I said earlier, kind of you're walking along at sort of a nose distance away from the apartments where people are living. So, you know, you can be quite nosy, but I was sort of ambling along at the back of the group because people just tend to sort of go off and do their own thing along here because there's something for everybody. And I was just sort of taken by the zigzag of the path, but the geometry of all the lines, and I just love the way they all converge. You know, the vanishing point is sort of a way off, and I just trying to play with the shape. It's just like I was just playing, really. And then I sort of started to really like what I was seeing. So I ended up getting a tripod out and standing on a bench and looking down and adjusting it. And I had a small crowd of onlookers at one point who were fascinated by what I was doing. And it's not an image I'm ever really going to do anything with. You know, I just enjoyed taking it. And I think that's one of the things, you know, often we try and take pictures for a purpose. And we forget about taking them just because we enjoy taking them sometimes. So, you know, not every image you take has to be an award winner or, you know, be printed up huge and sort of lauded around or even displayed on the internet. You can just take pictures for the simple pleasure of having seen something you like, which is what this was all about. I love the texture of the grass, the contrast between the grass and the concrete. You know, I've shot it wide open as well. So the background naturally just falls out of focus, and the edge of what little bit of depth of field there is on that is just on the bench. So, and I like shooting wide open. I think, you know, it exaggerates the sort of softness of things.
And great if you've got dust spots. I think,
Very.
especially with a huge medium format sensor. One tiny thing on this, and I know, Adrian, you might be itching to get in, but I'm going to just keep us honest for time reasons. Great point, Paul. I really think if just the physical act of spending 4, 5, 10 minutes playing with shape, engaging your mind in being visually aware is a huge thing about photography that I know you and I do harp on about a bit, but it's so good for you to spend that time being creative on just one single scene that may or may not end up going anywhere else, because it's the 10 minutes of doing it where the joy might be had. So I just wanted to kind of absolutely concur with you on that as we come to our final image, which sums up a lot of the things we've talked about with fantastic symmetry, you know, blacks, whites. And so I wanted to kind of have this in last. So just briefly, Paul, if you can, give us a little bit of the background here, and then we'll just throw to Adrian as we come towards an end here.
Sure. So this is the vessel in Hudson Yards, and the vessel is a brand new building, and effectively it's just a folly. It's I think it's 154 interconnecting staircases. It's an amazing thing. It looks like a giant beehive. The underside of it, which is black in my picture, is all copper. So it looks incredible. And at the moment, it's still free to get in. You just book the day ahead and you can rock up and you can wander up and down the staircases to your heart's content. What I had to do, I waited 45 minutes for my view to be empty of people. So I didn't get all the way to the very, very top. I stopped part way up where I got the composition I wanted. And I just waited for people to get out of the way. So, you know, it was a long wait for a very fast shutter speed.
Yes, but well worth it. Well worth it. And I suppose, Adrian, you know, as we come towards an end, we're just going to get a couple of final comments from everyone. So thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll just have a couple more minutes. You know, we've talked a bit about it, but new architecture does throw up different shapes and different opportunities. So New York feels to me, as someone who's never been there, believe it or not, but I know you have on different occasions, it seems to me a place where there's an awful lot of things if you're visually sensitive to shapes to play with.
Yeah, and I guess that is always the challenge as well, isn't it? There's so much, and as Paul said earlier, I think that trying to spot the subtleties and things that are happening and the reflections and things like that. So the reflections are hard to spot. Once you get kind of tune your eye in and you become a bit more sensitive to that, that can work really well. The lighting, the higher lighting during the day and so on, really helps with the glass buildings reflecting the light all over the place. So when we do get light, it's fantastic, and it's hunting down what to take. I mean, in shots like this, pure contrast, pure geometry is fabulous, and those opportunities are there. They're there in various places. And Oculus, as we saw before, in a very high key with a tiny sliver of grey, and all you need is that contrast, and there's something for your eye just locks onto that. So actually being able to see those things. And be able to capture them and then bring those out in the development later is fantastic. So yeah, there's plenty. I think there's really plenty of opportunity to capture architectural works, be it old or new. I think there's so much we can do.
Yeah, and such a style to the place. So Paul, just as we come to a finish, and thank you both so much for your time. You and we all do bits of work together, and I always enjoy spending time with you too. It's always good fun, even remotely. In fact, it's even better. But we should mention,
almost sounded sincere.
Yeah, I saved it. We should mention the tour runs in January, so just keep Light and Land website to have a look at the tour. Obviously, with these two, and as we've talked about, they do have slightly different approaches, which is great because you kind of get the best of both worlds from both of them. And I know they both have a great deal of fun talking to you and talking to guests about different ways of looking at things. Paul, just final point, just a query. Do you find people who maybe, I don't know, do you get a mix of people who are already pretty keyed into looking at architectural and urban scenes, as well as people who may be more landscape, who might at first struggle a little bit to operate in this environment? And do you find over a period of days, people just attune to seeing and understanding shapes and scenes in this sort of space?
Yeah, I think New York is one of those places that there is something for everybody. It is a challenge. If you're used to shooting, green hills and grassy knolls, you will struggle a little bit to start with. But as soon as you start to get a feel for it, as soon as you stop putting pressure on yourself to come up with a great classic picture, actually you can really sort of get under the skin of the place and start to find your own way. And the pictures that you come back with should be your own reflection on a fantastic city. And if you are struggling, I usually set a couple of challenges to help people along the way, just to get them thinking differently, thinking outside the box, because you don't want to be inside your comfort zone when you do a tour like this anyway. You want to be just on the edge of your comfort zone. That's where the magic stuff happens. So come, because it's the last time I'll be going to New York.
Yeah, and what a combination of Adrian and Paul. I mean, people out there, you'll come back either tears with laughter or tears with despair. No, you'll have a great time. And hopefully, couple of nice comments coming in. Thank you, everyone, for those. It's been great. I absolutely got the timing wrong here because there's one more image, but I don't know what we need to say about this, to be honest. He says, looking at the time. But for me, if I can add a tiny thing, there's a timeless nature to it. Obviously we understand a little bit because of the scene, but it's so iconic and such a great way to deal with it. Again, Paul, that maybe breaks lots of rules, and for that exact reason is why it works so wonderfully, in my opinion, of that. But I will just bring us to a close because Paul has to do his marathon training still tonight. No, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. It's been great fun as ever. I'm really enjoying these Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. on Facebook. We've had a couple of questions about where the stream is, and sometimes we've been putting the post up with a reminder link. Sometimes we've just been going live. So we're just trying to kind of iron out the best way for everyone. But thank you for joining us. It'll always be on the page, so you can go back and look at it. And I know the Light and Land team do put it up on YouTube in the coming days, so you can check it out on there. If you have had any connection issues or anything like that, blame the weather. It's what stops the trains working. And even Charlie's joined us there. Thank you as well, Charlie. Next week, I'm going to be...
at the last minute.
No, he's been there the whole time. Next week, I am going to be in Stockholm not literally, but I'm going to be with Astrid McGeechan in Stockholm. And again, totally different city with totally different vibe and totally different sets of images. And it's really fun to see that and experience the different characteristics of all our leaders and all the locations, you know, that we go to with Light and Land. But again, for more info, check out the website, check out Paul's website, check out Adrian's website. And Adrian's actually going to be back on in about 3 or 4 weeks, talking about North Devon. That's correct, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. Talk about North Devon.
So we'll be doing some black and white. We may even get into a bit of processing on that and some techniques about that. So
I think so.
Just work out some technical fun things for that. But for now, that is it from us. I'm going to close this live stream down. Join us again next week, 8 o'clock, Tuesday night on the Light and Land Facebook page. But for now, good night, and good night from all of us.
Good night.
Good night.